morning, folks, and welcome to Power Negotiating. Today's session is going to be on establishing a relationship with your friendly neighborhood title insurance company. Now, let's talk about the difference between a title insurance company and a closing attorney. With a title insurance company, typically a good title insurance company that's doing very well will close maybe 50 to 100, 150, 250 transactions per month. With a closing attorney, that same closing attorney, if they're really good, might close 20, might close 30. With a title insurance company, the person that opens your file is going to be the one that's going to be doing the closing. And so they're going to know all of the information that's on there. They're going to know your file very well. With a closing attorney, they typically come into the closing room and they'll have an assistant that comes up and hands them the folder and says, "That's the buyer over there," wave hi to the buyer, "that's the seller over there. And just go ahead and do the closing. I put post-it notes and tell people where to go." And the attorney doesn't know a darn thing about your title work. They haven't done any of the research. They're just going to say, "Okay, it says buyer signs here. Oh, buyer signed here." This isn't exactly what you want from a professional. In my opinion, this is just me, closing attorneys are overrated because they're not really professional in what they do. It's their paralegals that do all the work. Well, why not work with someone that knows the whole story and that knows all the title issues and can answer questions? So find a good title insurance company. If I can go ahead and make a couple of hints on title insurance company. There's basically two types. There's the national title insurance companies, and basically what they do is they find bright, shiny kids that are just out of college, and they give them a job paying them just above clerk wages, and they put them in there, and they don't know beans. And they're bright and shiny, and they're really cute, and they're gorgeous girls usually, and the guys there are handsome, and they've got, you know, the nice shirts on and everything. And if you ask them a question, they're going to give you this dumb look on their face because they don't know the answer. And it usually takes about 3 to 5 years before they know what they're doing. And then, if they're smart and if they're ambitious, they will head off and they will start their own title insurance company. When they start their own title insurance company, they're going to have to know all the answers. And if they're very good, my ex-wife was very good at being a title insurance agent. If they're very good, what they'll do is they will research all the questions that they have and they will become experts in what they do. And after they've been doing this a while, they're no longer quite as bright and shiny. They might not be somebody that you think is, wow, that could be a model. But they will have experience. They will have knowledge. Now, you're going to say, Reed, why do I need to know a good title insurance company? Remember in our last session we talked about expenses. Here are a couple of things that you want to be aware of. When you're doing a lease option, you can avoid a lot of these costs. But when you're doing an actual closing, you're going to have doc stamps. These are stamps that the county or the state charges in order to publish a transaction, and it's typically maybe 2 points, 3 points that you're going to have in closing cost, not including your lender's fees. And if you think about 1 or 2 or 3 points being your closing cost, to do a purchase, how much does it cost to do a lease option? Well, you're renting. You're not purchasing. You're going to have to record your lease, record your options, record those separately, and depending upon where you are, that might be maybe $6 or $7 for the first page and maybe $5 for every page after that. You're going to have to pay some doc stamps, maybe some stamps for the amount on the. No, you don't have to do that with a lease option. You're going to have maybe $20, $30 in recording fees. Let's call it $50 just for fun. Now, would I rather pay $50 or would I rather pay 3 points? I'd rather pay $50 and do a lease option. Now, eventually, you're going to have the closing cost. But guess what? The buyer is going to be paying most of those costs. So when you're doing a lease option, this is a way for you to avoid a lot of these costs. But you still want to know what? You want to know what your costs are eventually. Because if you don't have those built in, you can come down to the closing table, come down to closing, and you could have a very unpleasant surprise. So here are a couple of expenses you're going to have. Number one, probably, you're going to have to pay for doc stamps and intangible taxes. and all the costs that are involved in recording the document and paying the satisfactory taxes to the local county government. You're going to have title insurance. And there's two parts to this. You're going to have lender's title insurance, and that pays for enough title insurance in case the loan, in case there's something wrong with the title work, that the lender gets paid off. And then you're going to have the owner's policy, and typically that's the difference between the loan amount and the purchase price. And the buyer pays that. So we don't have to worry about that second part, just the lender's policy, which is what we usually pay, unless you negotiate otherwise. The next thing you have to look out for is what are some of the other closing costs. Are you going to have an appraisal? That's typically in order to get a loan, and so that's typically paid for by a buyer. Do you need to have a survey? That's typically something that you need to get a loan, and so that's paid for by the buyer. Do you need to have your lender's fees? That's typically something you need to have a loan, so that's paid for by the buyer. You're going to have other costs that are involved in this. You're going to say, Reed, what exactly is typical and customary in my area? Doesn't matter. Every real estate transaction is totally negotiable. So when I negotiate this, what I do is I define what I'm going to pay in the closing cost. And here's a neat way to do it. Seller, in this case it'd be you, when you're talking with the tenant buyer, will pay all closing costs up to $500. Well, what did that just do? Let's say the closing costs are $5,000. Seller, that's you, will pay all closing costs up to $500, which means you're limited to $500. What happens if the buyer doesn't quite understand that? They're going to have to come up with the other $4,500. Great. Most of the costs are involved in the buyer getting the loan anyway. When you're talking with the seller, and I want to be completely fair, half the time I want the buyer to pay all the closing costs, half the time I want the seller to pay all the closing costs, depending, of course, upon if I'm buying or selling. So I want to have a good working relationship with a title insurance company, and I want to get a breakdown on a HUD-1 statement showing exactly what all the costs are. And you say, Reed, why don't I just do this myself? Yes, you can, but you want to get someone that does this every day and knows their stuff to go ahead and do this. After a while, you'll be able to plug in the numbers yourself. The first couple times, work with the title insurance company and find out what all the costs are. Now, as you start negotiating these, and you start, let me ask you a question. If there's $5,000 in closing costs, and I can have the other party pay for that, did I just increase my profit by $5,000? Did they even notice? The answer is yes, and probably not. If I can always have someone else pay for the closing cost when I'm negotiating this, is that a good thing to do?